Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Right. Hello. Just kicking off our week 3 sessions here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I see people are coming in. We have some great presenters today, so I want to give them as much time as possible. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining the 12th Annual Seek Forum's 9th webinar, Planning for Energy Reliability Solutions that do more than just keep the lights on, featuring Guidehouse, the City of Santa Barbara, Zero City LLC, and the Clean Coalition. This year's forum is funded and sponsored by 3CREN, BayREN, and SoCalREN, with additional sponsorships from Terra Verde Energy, the Energy Coalition, and TRC. And I also want to give a huge shout out to our promo partners for helping us extend our reach. And just to go over some quick housekeeping, please do be sure to ask any questions you have through our Q&A box. You'll have an option to upvote on questions that you would like to see answered. So we really encourage you to use this option because it'll help us prioritize which questions to answer during our Q&A portion. And additionally, we encourage you to use the chat box to interact with other participants, introduce yourself, or reach out to Seek staff with any tech issues you might be encountering. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to our moderator for this webinar, Peter Asmus, who is the research director at Guidehouse.
Well, thank you. Well, we're going to be talking today about an issue near and dear to my heart, microgrids. I've been studying microgrids now closely for over 11 years. And so we do, at Guidehouse, we do a lot of forecasting in the future. We actually rank vendors, and we also look into specific applications. But I think what's interesting with microgrids is when I started 11 years ago, I used to always say there were no government programs specifically designed to promote microgrids, but that has changed radically. So let's focus on California first. There was a bill passed in 2018, SB 1339, which has a variety of tracks. It's very bureaucratic, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there is a part of it that has $200 million to fund clean energy microgrids. So that's one aspect of what can help local governments in California. There's also a bill winding through the legislature right now, SB 99, which is also designed to help local governments and community microgrids. It's had unanimous support so far on almost all the votes, and it's coming up for a key vote in late August. And so if you want more information about that, you can check with the Climate Center, which is one of the entities promoting it, along with a lot of other entities. And then last but not least, we're now getting some help from the federal government. We've heard a lot about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which does a lot of different things, but it does have some money that could go to microgrids. It's got a $5 billion matching grant program to harden the grid. It's also got a $5 billion research program for demonstration projects that could include microgrids, and then has $1 billion for remote and rural areas to set up microgrids. So I guess my basic message is, microgrids are growing. We have a global perspective. The main reason we need microgrids is because DERs, distributed energy resources, beginning this year, there's more DERs coming online than centralized generation, and that gap grows over time. And so we're just going to need things like microgrids to help organize that. And so with that, the bills, if someone wanted me to repeat the bills, there's SB 1339, and there's SB 99. SB 1339 was passed in 2018, but SB 99 is winding its way through the legislature right now. So let me introduce our panelists. So first up, we have Alelia Parento, I think I pronounced that right, who's the Energy and Climate Manager for the City of Santa Barbara. In her job, she identifies energy efficiency and conservation strategies, implements new technologies to reduce the city's energy consumption and transition to 100% renewable energy. On top of all that, she also coordinates the development and implementation of the city climate plan. Next up will be Martin Carver. He's the founder and managing partner of Zero City LLC, a firm that specializes in strategic energy planning for municipalities. He has 38 years of professional experience working with municipalities, and since 2017 has led the team developing the Gonzales Municipal Microgrid project. I've actually been looking at that project as of a firm called Concentric Power, which is involved with that and is focused a lot on microgrids in the Central Valley, an area that's often ignored. And then last, but certainly not least, there's Craig Lewis, who's the executive director of the Clean Coalition. He's been doing that since 2009. He has over 30 years of experience in renewables, wireless, semiconductor, and banking industries, with previous positions for Qualcomm, Ericsson, and Barclays Bank. So with that, that's my intro. Let's turn it over to Alelia and let's get going.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and to talk about resilience, and especially energy resilience and reliability. And I'm really going to talk about how our work has culminated into identifying where to prioritize with microgrids and distributed energy resources. Next slide. So the very first place we had to start as we were trying to figure out where should these microgrids go is really defining resilience. What does it mean? What are we trying to accomplish? And ultimately, it's the ability to respond and adapt and recover from some sort of disaster. This really hit home for us in Santa Barbara after the Thomas fire and the ensuing debris flow, when we were essentially cut off from all services for 3 weeks as mud filled the 101 freeway. Next slide, please. And so that's when the problem statement came into full focus. Next slide. And we started taking a hard look at our grid. So this is a really rudimentary graphic of our local grid in Santa Barbara. But as you can see, we have the two blue lines where the arrow says 220 kV. Those are our big transmission lines, and they are co-located over a mountain range that is both prone to seismic activity and wildfires. And really that's our primary source of power. And so should those go down, which is called an N-2 event, we would be in big trouble. A few years back, or almost a decade now, Edison did complete a project, which are these 3 green lines, the 66 kV tie lines, which are sort of providing backup power to Ventura and Santa Barbara areas. These tie lines are great, but they only accommodate a portion of our load. And so they would be prioritized between Ventura and Santa Barbara for critical circuits that have life support capacity. So police stations, hospitals, water treatment, etc. And so that still leaves us with a big problem of what happens in the event that these go down. And really a lot of our community is without power. On top of that, because of our propensity for wildfire, we are subject to public safety power shutoff, warnings and events. And so wanting to prepare our community for that, it's made our community very aware of our reliability issues in our area and very vocal about how they want to deal with it. Furthermore, we just have old infrastructure. And for a number of years now, Southern California Edison has been working to upgrade that infrastructure and improve reliability in our area, but it's slow going and it's imperfect, as of course. Next slide, please. On top of that, our council's been very aggressive with their energy and climate goals. So they've established an aspirational goal of carbon neutrality by 2035, which is essentially tomorrow for anyone working in this field. And really that means that we're really earnestly looking at transitioning away from natural gas and electrifying buildings, vehicles, and other sources, creating potentially more constraints on our grid and something that we just have to plan for. Additionally, it's become a big priority to build local energy resources. Our council did pass a 100% renewable energy goal for the whole community a few years back. And really the intent of that goal was to build it local and improve resilience and reliability. So that does help with reliance. It also allows us to leverage things like our local community choice energy program that's launching in October, and to try and mitigate the duck curve as much as we can. Next slide. So now that we've got the problem, we have to figure out how to address those issues. How do we build that reliability and the resilience and prepare for that N-2 event? Next slide. Well, we're figuring out our priorities. So clearly, an easy priority to identify is critical facilities because for the most part, they're city controlled. So we have water infrastructure, we have life safety measures like police and fire, we have community centers and libraries that are actually great opportunities for resilience hubs. And then we can also leverage our partnerships with the community to expand beyond city controlled facilities one day. And then feasibility, right? How easy is it to upgrade these buildings to microgrids? And that's not actually always very easy. There's a lot of considerations like panel upgrades and solar sizing. A lot of our buildings can't site enough solar to offset their loads. And so how do we manage the critical panels and all of those? So really breaking down which buildings are feasible so that we can just get started. Next slide, please. We, over a number of years now, we've sort of been doing a lot of work that's led to this point where we can start actually implementing microgrids. So one is we have a strategic energy plan that came out of that 100% renewable energy goal, which identified both community and municipal distributed energy resource potential. So where could solar be sited? How much of it? How easy would it be? And what types of procedural changes would we need to make as a city to make that happen? And then we also had a CEC funded ZNE or Zero Net Energy Roadmap study done, which did level 2 ASHRAE audits of all of our occupied buildings, identified potential energy efficiency measures, and then offset the remaining load with solar and storage. What that roadmap did is it allowed us to rank basically which buildings would be easiest to transition to ZNE and islandable buildings or a microgrid, and then which would be hardest and needed more legwork. We built onto both of those efforts with starting to work with our emergency managers to create a more streamlined definition of critical facilities. As we started that process, it turns out there were about 5 different lists of critical facilities based on different groups' definition. And so we really need to work together to hone those lists and make sure that we were all working off of the same priority list. Next slide, please. And then paying for it, right? So when I talk about feasibility, it's not only infrastructure feasibility, but which are the easiest to actually implement because they cost less. And so we're sort of stacking a number of financing mechanisms. There's no one of our projects has one single financing mechanisms. They're all stacked, where we start in a lot of cases with a power purchase agreement for solar arrays. We're having a lot of success with those, and they are working out financially in 100% of the cases so far. So that's great. And then we are stacking where possible the self-generation incentive program, in particular, those added budgets that came out earlier last year for resilience and equity to pay for some of the storage costs. We're also leveraging our community choice energy entity to help finance some of these projects and then be the beneficiary of some ancillary benefits like resource adequacy, which load serving entities have to pay into, and other things. So that's great. And it does provide some demand response opportunity. And then of course there's grants, and we're continuing to look into those opportunities. We have a project currently on a downtown parking garage that also happens to house our 911 call center that was already under a power purchase agreement for a 500 kW solar array. And when that equity and resilience budget came out for the SGIP, we were able to immediately roll that into an application and get fully funded for the battery. And so just having sort of that pre-planning from the ZNE roadmap and then these payment structures really allowed us to move quickly and nimbly to get that funding. Next slide, please. And then building on these first building blocks, which all came out of, it wasn't a planned process, right? We didn't start out 5 years ago and say, okay, we're going to do a strategic energy plan, and then we're going to do a zero net energy roadmap, and then we're going to funnel these financing mechanisms into a project. It's all come ad hoc. As we all know, as practitioners in this field, things are coming at us every day that are new opportunities or new hurdles. And so we're having to adapt. But so now we're trying to figure out how do we build these great tools that we now have in our toolkit so that we continue to be ready to respond to funding as it comes down the pike and to challenges. And so we're building off of these existing plans, and to be ready, we've prioritized our list of projects so that we know exactly which ones are coming next in our application queue. And then we're also transitioning to a regional focus, understanding that, it's great if Santa Barbara builds out all of these resilience hubs and microgrids, but it doesn't serve the greater community on a regional scale. So how can we work with our neighbors around us and our local climate collaborative to make sure that we're addressing the needs of the greater community as a whole, and that we're not creating a little island in the city of Santa Barbara? And so that's going very well. And then what we're trying to do at the same time is to pair all of this work with an evaluation of our municipal buildings so that they're ready to electrify, right? So not only are we planning for panel sizing of solar and storage, but how do we plan for transitioning appliances to electric as they fail? Because right now, if we have a hot water heater that fails, we need that hot water heater implemented immediately. And so we don't have time to get the panel upgrade, to research the heat pump water heater and convince the building owners to adopt that. So we're trying to do all that legwork in advance in conjunction with this resilience planning. And next slide, I think that's it. I think we're transitioning to Martin. Thank you.
Oh, Martin, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay, how am I now?
Sounds perfect, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll start again then. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much to the LGC for hosting this forum. And Peter, thanks for that fine introduction earlier. My task today is to talk about the conceptual work that has gone into the Gonzales microgrid project, and to talk at least a little bit about some of the lessons learned in that process. For the uninitiated, Gonzales is a small city, about 8,500 people, located in the Salinas Valley, about a half an hour south of the city of Salinas. Next slide, please. So I want to start by painting the big picture. I know that Craig is probably going to talk a lot more about this stuff, but I thought it worth taking a moment that and say that from my perspective, from our perspective, there's been a lot of progress on developing renewables in California, but too little attention paid to grid modernization. As I talk to clients in cities around the region, it is not unusual to hear stories about how PG&E or whatever the incumbent utility is doesn't have the capacity to serve growth in the city's industrial park, and perhaps could take years to actually get that additional service online. It's, from my point of view, the investor-owned utilities seems like they're basically overwhelmed dealing with the impacts of climate change, wildfires, and the like. And of course, with every crisis comes an opportunity. In this case, the opportunity to bring California's power grid into the 21st century. Let's remember that San Diego Gas and Electric was founded in 1881. Southern California Edison, 1896. PG&E, 1905. We believe that there's the time is right and the past due for grid modernization, and we believe local government is in a position to make a contribution at this critical juncture. Next slide, please. So what we're learning with Gonzales is that energy security can begin locally. Local government has its advantages, natural advantages. First of all, they have public utility experience. They have land resources, typically around their wastewater treatment plant, usually other places as well. And not insignificantly, municipal utilities operate independent from the California Public Utilities Commission, which means that they bypass a lot of red tape. In the case of Gonzales, it took one smart city manager with a progressive outlook to make the Gonzales microgrid a reality. And having paved that path. We're hoping that it's less risky for other jurisdictions to follow. I'll also note that microgrid development is a natural extension of climate action planning, which is vested at the local level. Next slide, please. So let's dive into some of the, a little bit into the details of the Gonzales microgrid project. Gonzales opted for a turnkey approach for its microgrid that included project financing that financed most of it in any event. This allowed a small city, 8,500 people, to leverage upward of $80 million in private financing to build 35 gigawatt hour per year system serving 10 to 12 large industrial users. Now, a larger city with more financial resources might very well consider public financing rather than public-private partnership. And there are good tools out there like enhanced infrastructure finance districts, your EIFDs, and revenues can be better, but not all cities are in a position to take on that kind of public financing. For the city of Gonzales, the small city that it is, the public-private partnership model avoided putting the city's general fund at risk, and it allowed it to move forward on a project that otherwise would have been completely out of its reach. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about selecting a private partner, because in Gonzales, that's the case. For other projects in the future that are doing public financing, this may not be so relevant, but for the small cities that want to leverage that private financing, selecting a private partner is key to that process. In the case of Gonzales, we used an RFI process, a request for information process, and we solicited proposals from 3 firms, NG, Ameresco, Concentric Power, and we received 3 very impressive proposals from these firms. At the end of the day, we recommended Concentric Power to the city of Gonzales, and they showed a keen ability to think outside the box, and they had local knowledge of customers in and around Gonzales. So they seemed like the natural choice. Once we had made that selection, we used a memorandum of understanding process. We didn't dive straight into an energy services agreement. We first did a memorandum of understanding that basically allowed us to set parameters for negotiations, time limits for the negotiation, expectations for recouping expenses, expectations for retail tariffs, and the like. And all of that work at the end of the day made getting to an energy services agreement more possible, and kept the private vendor, the private partner, and the city aligned as they went through the process. Next slide, please. So lessons learned. Look, I could talk about this for hours, but it really distills down to these points. First of all, with at least the project in Gonzales, this is not a small project, you know, $75, $80 million in just phase 1. That's a lot of money, and private partners need to know that there's competition out there and that cities are willing to go to that competition if their needs are not being met. Second of all, we highly recommend establishing an equity position. Revenues from a project like this are very much related to your equity position. And so we were pretty insistent throughout the process that Gonzales have the right and take on the task of actually delivering the power, not producing it, not generating it, but the poles and wires, if you will. And that actually established an equity position that meant that they would get a pretty decent return for all the trouble they've gone through. These kind of projects very much need specialized legal counsel. Now, for larger jurisdictions, I still think it's probably the case. City attorneys do a great job, but the legal work that's required in an energy services agreement is very specialized, and there are just a lot of pitfalls, a lot of traps that can only be avoided if you have a legal counsel that's well versed in energy related law. Talking about energy services agreement, we highly recommend that the municipality take the lead on drafting the energy services agreement. You don't want to be in a position where you're responding to a draft that comes from a private partner. They're typically too one-sided. Finally, consider setting price targets in your memorandum of understanding up front. Now, this is a double-edged sword. It helps keep the price down. I mean, the thing about energy services agreement, there are intense negotiations. And so with an MOU setting that price target, it allows you to place downward pressure so that every time there's a sticking point, it doesn't mean that the cost of energy to your customers are going up. You know, the downside, of course, is that once you've sort of set that expectation with your customers prior to actually having an energy services agreement in place, then you have to live with it and you have to make it work. So there's pros and cons. We decided to do it, and I'm personally glad that we did. Next slide, please. So I've got a couple more slides, and I'm gonna wrap up. It was interesting for this particular webinar. The group of us met a few weeks ago to plan it out, and you know who's going to talk first and all this and that. During that process, one of my colleagues referred to the project as the concentric microgrid, which I thought was interesting. It makes me want to point out that as impressive as the engineering is, and by the way, it's very impressive, Concentric Power has done a wonderful job. Nonetheless, it's actually not the most important thing about the Gonzales project. The real innovation came from City Hall. Gonzales microgrid is groundbreaking because it shows how a small jurisdiction can leverage private funds to rebuild the state's power grid one small piece at a time. And we think that's important. Final slide, please. In the opening plenary session a couple weeks ago for this forum, one of the speakers, so eloquent, reminded us that disadvantaged communities often bear the brunt of climate change. And I want to be able to point out that a project like Gonzales actually creates a meaningful opportunity for disadvantaged communities to solve, to be more resilient, and to be able to have revenues that actually make a difference. It's a powerful economic development tool. In Gonzales, 15 out of the gate, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, when everyone else is paying 20 cents and above to the incumbent utilities. That means land in the Gonzales Industrial Park is going to build out very quickly. That's a powerful economic development tool. As I mentioned before, these kind of projects also lend support for climate action programming. And finally, last but not least, these kind of projects really bolster the overall fiscal health of the municipal utilities that are doing more than just providing electricity, by the way. They're providing water and sewer and the like. So that's my presentation, and I look forward to the questions and answers. We'll turn it over to, I think, Craig now to talk a bit about the big picture. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to follow Alelia and Martin, because what I'm going to be talking about is community microgrids, which Martin gave one of the most exciting examples of that exists anywhere in the country and really anywhere in the world. And Alelia talked a lot about, essentially solar microgrids, and particularly solar microgrids for critical community facilities. So I'll be talking about both community microgrids and solar microgrids, providing some examples and also opportunities, and then really getting into the economic, environmental, and resilience benefits that both of these types of microgrids provide. So let's see, make sure I know how to transition my slides here. I'm not controlling it. So yeah, thank you for advancing there. So just, make sure everybody knows who the Clean Coalition is. We're a nonprofit. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy, and a modern grid. We have a vision for 100% renewable energy. We think that can happen somewhere between 10 and 30 years from now. The Clean Coalition's mission is to accelerate that, right? Bring it on to make it happen within the 10-year time frame instead of extending multiple decades. And when we get there, we believe that at least 25% of the energy mix needs to be coming from local renewable energy. And if we do that, then we can bring that amazing unparalleled trifecta of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits. And you have to have local energy for resilience. And if you have local energy, you also optimize the environmental benefits by having really efficient energy. You're not losing 10 to 15% of your energy transporting it over long distances. And you're not wiping out pristine environments, paving over deserts and other pristine environments with, solar panels or wind turbines, whatever you want to call it, or power, or fossil fuel power plants, whatever, right? Having it on rooftops, parking lots, parking structures, reutilizes existing built environments. And that's really how to optimize your environmental benefits. But getting it local means you're not dependent on the transmission grid. And as Aurelia said, transmission grids are really vulnerable. In fact, any long supply line is vulnerable. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about an electric transmission line or a long fossil fuel pipeline like we saw back east, with the cyber lockdown that happened a couple months ago. We need to get these generating assets, the distributed energy resources locally in order to truly get resilience. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of words on this slide. I'm just gonna just take you to the point. The main point of this slide is that if you're going to really harness resilience, you need to also be thinking about not only getting those distributed energy resources locally, but you also have to be really thoughtful about which loads are most important to you, because loads are not created equally. If you're talking about a fire station, your dispatch center and your fuel pump are the two most important loads. It's not the air conditioning. It's not the lights in the back closet. It is the dispatch. If you don't have communication with your fleet of people and other resources, you're not going to be able to fight a fire very effectively. And if you can't get fuel into your vehicles, you're not going to get those vehicles to where they need to be. So, you really have to be thoughtful about where your most important loads are. And the Clean Coalition has a value of resilience methodology that we call VOR 123. VOR stands for value of resilience, and 123 stands for load tiering into 3 tiers. Tier 1 being the most critical loads, and tier 2 being priority loads. These tier 1 loads, you'll keep them on forever. Tier 2 loads are priority. You'll keep them on as long as you can without threatening the ability to keep your tier 1s on. And tier 3 loads are everything else. Next slide, please. And just a visual here. In most situations, tier 1 loads are a very small percentage of the overall load. Typically, they're about 10% of the loads. Tier 2 loads are about 15%, and tier 3 loads are the other 75%. So you're really playing to make sure your tier 1 loads never shut down. And by the way, in this VOR 123 methodology, load management is absolutely critical. And the Clean Coalition is going to be hosting a webinar on one of the leading load management solutions, behind the meter load management solutions that exists. It's from a company called Atom Power, and we're hosting a webinar that will be coming up on Tuesday, the 14th of September. So just a couple of weeks from now. And I will put into the chat box a link to that webinar. But let's go to the next slide. What I want to say here is that what we're looking at is the resilience that's provided by a solar microgrid. So if you have a solar microgrid that has enough solar to net zero the site, and this is for a location in California. In fact, it's at University of California, Santa Barbara. So right in the middle of the coast of California, and right in the middle of the Santa Barbara region. The Galita load pocket is referred to electrically, which is super transmission grid vulnerable, as Aurelia mentioned. And UCSB is the primary sheltering site for all of Santa Barbara County. So if you have nowhere else to go, you live in Santa Barbara, it doesn't matter if you're in Carpinteria or Santa Maria or anywhere in between, you're supposed to go to UCSB. They've got a lot of solar there. They don't have any energy storage yet. And we did a study to map out how to do a community microgrid there to provide this level of resilience, which means the critical loads never turn off. So 10% of the loads stay on forever, 15% of the loads stay on for at least 80% of the time. Those are your tier 2 loads. And the remainder of the loads stay on for about 25% of the time. If you have enough solar to net zero the site, and you put 2 hours of energy storage for so for every kilowatt of solar, you put 2 kilowatt hours of energy storage, this is what you get. This is the level of resilience. And I just want to contrast that to the resilience that comes from a diesel generator, which most people think of as the default solution for resilience. Compared to a solar microgrid, a diesel generator is not resilient at all. So that little red hatched rectangle is the amount of resilience you get from a diesel generator. Typical diesel generator has 2 days of on-site fuel supply, and it keeps the tier 1 and the tier 2 loads on for 2 days. After 2 days, your light's out, that's gone. Most facilities are not going to be able to resupply diesel fuel in an emergency. The diesel fuel is going to go to the top priority critical community facilities. Everybody else is going to be lights out. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Goleta load pocket. This is the Santa Barbara region. Layla already referred to it. Next slide. So the Goleta load pocket is referred to from its electrical characteristics, and the primary electrical characteristic being that the entire Santa Barbara region only has one point of interconnection to the transmission system, and that is through the Goleta substation, which is marked there in the middle of this map. Aurelia referred to it with a slightly different kind of cartoonish map, which it was good map. We use that map too. But the purple trace there is the 2 transmission lines that Aurelia talked about. And as she said, those 2 transmission lines are in exactly the same transmission towers. If one of those lines go down, both of those lines are going down. And Southern California Edison, which is the utility that serves this area, has been very clear. Those lines go down, they will continue to go down. And when they go down, they could be down for months at a time. They come along the backside of mountains from 40 miles away down in Ventura, right through the heart of fire, extreme fire risk, extreme landslide risk, and extreme earthquake risk as well. The Clean Coalition has done an analysis to show that the way to get to resilience for the Goleta load pocket, the entire Santa Barbara region, this entire 70-mile area, is to get 200 megawatts of additional solar and 400 megawatt hours of additional energy storage, and we will have true resilience. If those transmission lines go down, we will be able to keep this entire region online. And by the way, it sounds like 400 megawatt hours of energy storage would be a lot tougher, but that's going to actually be relatively easy. The hard part is getting that 200 megawatts of solar. That's where the utility has really been blocking the way. The 400 megawatt hours of energy storage, we're going to have about 70% of that, 280 megawatt hours, is slotted to be online by the end of next year. So the energy storage is easy compared to the solar. We need to get solar cranking on every city, on every other municipal property we possibly can. Next slide. Just zeroing in on where there are opportunities. Obviously, doing the entire Goleta load pocket is just a gargantuan lift. We're not going to be able to do that in one step. So we have to do it. We have to find bite-sized steps to move these things forward in. The Gonzales community microgrid is a great example of a really targeted area. This is also a similar area we're looking at here. So this is the area around UCSB. It's a very key area that's all served by a single distribution feeder that comes out of the Goleta substation. Next slide. Just showing a little bit of some of the critical community facilities that are in this region. UCSB, which I mentioned, is this is a block diagram of the same thing. So we've got UCSB, it's the primary sheltering site. We've got fire stations, we've got the airport, the Santa Barbara Airport, and a number of other really critical community facilities. If you look at this map carefully, you'll see that there's a 160 megawatt hour battery that is slated to come online in this region. And it obviously serves as a major anchor for the distributed energy resources that are needed to turn this into a community microgrid. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to drill down now and start talking about solar microgrids, which can be a part of community microgrids. In fact, they generally are. There's a whole bunch of solar microgrids that are usually a part of a community microgrid. The difference between a solar microgrid and a community microgrid is that a solar microgrid is targeted at a single facility. A community microgrid requires usage of the existing distribution grid to tie different facilities together. So next slide. Santa Barbara Unified School District has 21 sites. The Clean Coalition was engaged to, it partnered with SAGE to conduct a feasibility study on all 21 of these sites, which we did. You can see that they're very spread out throughout the core populated areas of the Goleta load pocket. Next slide. And what we determined is that there 14 of the sites made sense to put solar on, and 6 of those 14 made sense to put solar microgrids on. So 6 of these sites, and those are the 3 big high schools, one of the strategically positioned junior highs, and the central food warehouse will be getting solar microgrids, along the design characteristics that I mentioned before, which is that the critical loads will never turn off. The priority loads and even the discretionary loads will remain online for the vast majority of time. I'll just, given we're running out of time, next slide, please. The net result from an economic standpoint is that the school district is guaranteed to have bill savings of almost $8 million over the 28-year power purchase agreements. And in addition to that, for free, get about $6.5 million in resilience value. Now, what is that $6.5 million in resilience value? That means that if the school district wanted to get that same level of resilience from diesel generators, they would have to pay $6.5 million. That's what that means. So essentially, the school district is getting about $15 million worth of value from these solar microgrids and solar installations. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to very quickly just touch on another project that the Clean Coalition is leading in the city of San Francisco. It's at the Valencia Gardens Apartments. We've got an energy storage project. Next slide, please. That is basically taking a site that has a tremendous amount of solar penetration. This is a picture of the Valencia Gardens Apartments. This is a real photograph. The solar is already there, and we're adding energy storage to it. Next slide, please. In order to provide, enhance the, there's another photo of it. Next slide, please. In order to enhance the ability of the feeder segment, so the distribution feeder in that area cannot host any more solar. So all of the neighbors to this apartment complex can't put any solar on. So we're putting the energy storage there to absorb a bunch of the solar and essentially increase the solar hosting capacity of the feeder segment. So that's what the project is slated to do. It's partially funded by the California Energy Commission. But what we can very easily do with this project is to add a grid isolation switch into it, which is shown in red. There's the red box there. That's a grid isolation switch. So that if the grid went down, we can basically open that switch and island the solar and the storage together so that they can serve they can provide a community microgrid to the Valencia Gardens Apartments, which has hundreds of meters, and it's an underserved population. It's seniors and low income populations that live there. This is this housing, the Valencia Gardens Apartments is owned and operated by a nonprofit focused on vulnerable populations. So this is a population you absolutely want to shelter in place. You do not want to waste the time of first responders to have to move people in a disaster from the Valencia Gardens Apartments just to soak up beds at an emergency shelter, right? That would be a phenomenal waste of resources, both in terms of the frontline workers and in terms of taking up beds in an emergency shelter, when there's a really easy way to shelter these people in place, right? Through just turning this Valencia Gardens energy storage project into a community microgrid. And it's a community microgrid because it's front of meter. The solar is front of meter, the energy storage is front of meter, and we tie those things together. We isolate them through that grid isolation switch. And this is basically tying a whole bunch of neighboring facilities together, each facility basically being an apartment in an apartment complex, but they are still separate meters. And tying them together makes this a community microgrid. and arguably a really important critical community facility. So we can just do sheltering in place where it makes a ton of sense to do sheltering in place. Next slide. Okay, next. I've talked about tiering a few times. Next slide. I know I'm running out of time. Next. Okay, this is my last slide. I just want to talk about, this is really relevant to things that Aurelia talked about. We have to be really thoughtful, not only about tiering loads, but we also have to tier facilities. And that's essentially what Aurelia was talking about for a good amount of her presentation. We have to look at facilities and determine what is important to our community. Obviously, she talked about cooling centers. I think obviously hospitals and fire stations, these are obvious critical community facilities. Those are tier 1 facilities. So then you can think about tier 2 facilities. The tier 2 facilities might be banks, right? If there's a disaster, people might need to get money. Obviously, grocery stores probably tier 1 facilities, but if they're not, they're definitely tier 2 facilities. That's where the food is, right? That's what's ultimately going to keep people alive. Tier 3 facilities, pretty much everything else, right? Most facilities are tier 3 facilities. They're not providing a bunch of value to the community. But a tier 3 facility, they can say, hey, we have tier 1 loads at our tier 3 facility. So it may not have community value, but it definitely has business value or other value to the particular facility. So this slide is something that the Clean Coalition has been working on for a while, and we've just announced a market mechanism proposal called the Resilient Energy Subscription, or RES, R-E-S, that basically shows how to get facilities to raise their hand and participate in a community microgrid by paying a fee, a RES fee, making a reservation, if you will, or for a resilient energy subscription for a guaranteed level of energy delivery every day when the grid is down. And each facility can determine how much energy they're going to need. It's not something that has to be determined centrally. It's independently. Each facility can determine that. And they can say, I need 100 kilowatt hours a day to keep my refrigerator, my communications, and whatever else that's tier 1 facility to me. I can keep that on. And I will pay a fee that allows the Gonzales community microgrid or the Goleta Load Pocket community microgrid or whatever community microgrid to grow and to finance itself through a revenue stream through these RES fees. And the RES fees don't change the rate tariff, so we don't have to go mucking around at the CPUC for years changing rate tariffs around. It's just a fee that rides on top of the rate tariffs. It's kind of like a renewable energy credit. It's a real simple, straightforward mechanism, and we don't have to go mucking around with changing rate tariffs. And I will put a link to our RES proposal into the chat box. And with that, I will conclude. And I think we're going to Q&A.
Yeah, so in terms of Q&A, we've had some questions kind of filtering throughout the presentation. I don't know, Martin, if you saw them. There were a few directed towards you about Gonzales, some folks acting about what does the equity position mean, and also a question about maintenance costs. So I don't know if you want to address that. I have some overall questions we could talk, but Martin, did you see those questions?
Yeah, I did see those questions, and I'm happy to take a run at them. First of all, to Andrea, elaborate more on what an equity position means and the pitfalls, et cetera. In the Gonzales example, the energy services agreement is really at heart an agreement to generate power and sell it to the utility for some wholesale price, and then the utility is going to turn around and sell that power to customers for some kind of retail price. And in negotiating that energy services agreement, it's good to actually have some of to be committed to actually building part of the project. This actually creates a footprint that means that there can be meaningful revenues that flow from the project rather than a turnkey operation that really the city has nothing to do with at all. It's a natural place for Gonzales, really for any city, to take on the poles and wires. Now, Nick, in the second question, asks a very related question about maintenance costs and wouldn't it be better to just leave them with the private partner? In the case of Gonzales, all of the equipment is new. The poles and wires are actually being built and are going to stand alongside equipment that PG&E has in place. Now, for some cities like Ukiah, for example, they have they own their entire grid system, and they're serving hundreds or thousands of residential customers as well as industrial customers. That would be a pitfall. I mean, that would be a red flag for me to take on the responsibility of maintaining a large grid system that has been in place for many, many years, could be failing in some places, could be a source of fire in some places. In Gonzales, it was an easy decision because it was basically it's all new equipment that's being put in place, and all of it's being undergrounded, or at least the critical pieces of it that the city is responsible for. And in terms of the maintenance, they're actually going to turn around and have an operations agreement with Concentric Power to actually have them do the actual work of maintaining that grid and just pay a fee each year to do so. I hope that starts to get at both of those questions.
Oh, yeah, no, I think that's good. We had another question. I guess it was directed towards Craig, but I was going to comment. So, we've heard about resilience. One of the challenges, though, with microgrids is sizing of the battery to provide longer duration resilience. And that's why, at least at Guidehouse here, there's been a big surge of interest in hydrogen. And in fact, I just released a white paper, I guess it was last week, about a microgrid in Sonoma, the Stone Edge Farm, which had the issue of overproducing renewable energy. It was uneconomic to sell that renewable energy back to the grid. So what they did is they converted it to hydrogen for on-site vehicles. But one of the challenges is this longer duration storage. So one trend I wanted to note is there's generators, there's diesel generators, but there's a new line of generators that can burn multiple fuels, including hydrogen. And we see that as a way to incrementally prepare for the future. So maybe today you're using natural gas, you could use biogas and hydrogen. But I guess there was a question for Craig. I don't know if you saw that, about hydrogen displacing diesel backups. I mean, I guess, the other challenge is hospitals are mandated to have diesel generators. So I think that's one thing that maybe should be changed. If you think about it, COVID patients with respiratory problems in hospitals that are mandated to use diesel generators. Now I think that'll be revisited. But I don't know, Craig, if you wanted to comment on hydrogen yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I think of hydrogen as a storage technology. It's just hydrogen has energy value in it, and you store it in a tank, and then you pull it out of that tank and you generate electricity when you need it, whether it's in a microgrid scenario or a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, which is basically using a hydrogen battery, right? That's what the hydrogen is in a fuel cell battery. The fuel cell converts the hydrogen gas into electricity, and it's still an electric drive vehicle. I'm a big proponent in investigating, how hydrogen can play a role in long duration storage. And when I talk about long duration, I'm talking about seasonal storage. We're working with utilities around the country, and when you get up into the northern stretches of the United States, you're talking about solar resource quality that in the wintertime is 10% of what it is in the summertime. And you need to be able to store some of that. If you're going to have a solar driven community microgrid, you need to be able to store some of that kind of the spring. Well, actually, you need to carry it into the winter. So you actually want to be able to carry fall solar generated electricity. You want to be able to store it in the fall and pull it out in the winter. Otherwise, if you're going to do it all with renewables, you need to diversify with wind and run a river hydro and anything else you can that's local, right? The challenge is you need to have local energy sources for resilience. So back to hydrogen, I think hydrogen has a lot of potential for a long duration storage, and I'm talking about months long storage, seasonal storage. The challenge with hydrogen is that you need to be able to pull it through a fuel cell if you want it to be clean. If you're going to burn hydrogen, you have a lot of NOx, nitrous oxides that are come out of that process. So fuel cells are a clean way to take hydrogen into electricity, and that's the way you want to do it. The challenge there is that most of the fuel cell providers don't yet accommodate 100% hydrogen. You have to mix it in with methane, and the most common source of methane is the natural gas pipeline, right? It's just kind of renewable natural gas, yes, but the dairy farm's probably not going to be next door to you, so you're really pulling just natural gas you're pulling methane out of the natural gas pipeline. So if you can have hydrogen local, store it local in heavy volumes for seasonal storage, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I will say I did do a report about distributed hydrogen and microgrids, and actually surprisingly, there are existing facilities, most of them extremely remote, where the cost of diesel is so high, over $1 kilowatt hour, where the hydrogen actually made sense through an electrolyzer. And of course now Bloom Energy also can create hydrogen. It can create electricity, but now they have a new product that's bidirectional. We're almost running out of time here. There was a question about the Public Utilities Commission and providing motivations for IOUs for microgrids. The one challenge with utilities deploying microgrids is that there's a rate basing issue that has come up where regulators have actually rejected some utility proposals, with the issue being, do the benefits flow to all of the customers or just a small subset? So that's been an issue where in some ways municipal utilities actually don't have as much of a conflict, but that issue is being resolved often with what's called non-wires alternatives, where the microgrid is actually deemed to be less costly than a transmission line, and therefore the regulators would approve it. Let's see. There's a question again for Martin. Can the microgrid be expanded to include more of the city? I don't know if you want to answer that kind of quickly, if you can.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a run at that. The answer is yes, absolutely. For Gonzales, it has never acted as a utility that's purveyed electricity before. So they've just set this up in the last couple of years. This beginning process, this phase one that focuses on the industrial park, allows them to get their feet on the ground, learn a lot. And I do think that over time, you'll see that they will expand their operations to include perhaps new subdivisions that get built, and perhaps eventually the entire city. It's something to watch out for in the future.
Yeah, and that brings us to a great point. Microgrids are often incremental. Most microgrids today are not greenfield projects. Some of them are, and that's probably going to increase, but that's what you have to understand. It's not like you have to build the whole microgrid at once. As you can, but a lot of that has to do with engineering and contracts, like the contracts for the DERs. Do they preclude you from rolling them into a microgrid? Can they be renegotiated? There was another question about vehicle to grid, and I wanted to say, that's a big issue now. In fact, at Guidehouse, our #1 selling topic, we sell reports, was anything to do with clean mobility, EVs. But now, if you think about it, microgrids and EVs go hand in hand, because if the larger grid is going down and we're electrifying the system, that means you're stranding transportation during these outages. And so I did a white paper earlier this year about on the East Coast with Montgomery County, we're doing an energy as a service business model with Schneider Electric to support bus fleets. So a lot of those early projects are focused on fleets because there's enough of a resource there. So those batteries can also support the microgrid. So it's sort of bidirectional value, supporting EVs, but those EVs could also be called upon as an emergency resource. So I think we have 1 minute left. So I guess maybe I should leave that for Serena. Are you ready to wrap up?
Yes, thank you so much to our panel for that. Just taking us through the stages, the various stages and examples of establishing microgrids and answering those questions. All right, I do want to give one more shout out to our sponsors and also just remind everyone that this is our last week of events for the forum. We do have a couple more events today, a couple more tomorrow, and then a couple more on Thursday where we'll have our closing plenary as well. So please do attend our last week of events. And also, if you haven't already seen in the chat, we did send a link to our post-session survey where you can have an opportunity to win a $50 gift card if you give feedback on the sessions that you're attending. There's no limit in entries, so please do share your feedback and we look forward to reading it. And yeah, have a great rest of your day and hopefully we'll see you very soon for our lunch event. All right, thanks again to our speakers.